This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome back to our final episode of our 5-part series with Werner Thie. Werner, we are going to talk about one of the favorite things that I learnt this year, and I happened to learn about this concept from you, and this is the 500-year plan. And kind of how do you as a business approach creating a 500-year plan? Because most people say, oh, we've got a plan for 10 years or 20 years, or even a succession plan for the next 2 generations. But PCR has a 500-year plan and is working towards that. So for people who have never heard about the concept of a 500-year plan, as I had not, talk to us about what it is and why it's so important.
Oh, it's a relatively handy number, which is big enough to change the thinking and the way we think about plans, and it's low enough to not be threatening in any way. So it's kind of a humanly embraceable period. So I was brought to this this idea came to me when there was kind of a necessity with PCR starting the process of rebranding and thinking about the business model we want to have and the mission statements and whatnot. And I thought, now this is maybe the 40th time I'm doing this, writing business plans and doing short-term analysis and drawing diagrams and stuff. And I was bored to the core by needing to redo this on these premises, which are, after all, have taught us to be humble and see that the time is crawling much slower and everything is developing much slower than we ever anticipated. So one of the big teaching point of the land here was that we are part of that rhythm, but we overestimate how fast we can accelerate and how much influence we have on that time scale. It's basically absolutely nothing. Our influence is guiding whatever is happening, but the time scale we do not control. And that experience led me to do some thinking about time scales in general, and I was harboring that thought for about 6 months before I ever voiced it. And voicing it the first time, I was met with quite some disbelief. And
the audacity of considering a 500-year plan was a little intimidating, I'm sure.
But there was a certain type of reaction I wanted to trigger with that, because there is nothing you can write down with the same precision as a 3 months or a 6-year or 5-year plan. No, with a 500-year plan and with that far away horizon, you are thrown back to the basic philosophy you want to implement in your business in a way which forces your thinking about the essentials of that strategy and whatnot. it's not about the implementation itself. It's about setting the tone of the business. It's about setting the ethical parameters of the business. It's about being, yes, if you want to set it up as something which is dishonest, yeah, then try to do this dishonesty for 500 years. And then you might recognize that there is actually no way that you're going to get away for 500 years with being dishonest. So meaning all this short-term thinking I was leery of vanished with one snapping of the fingers and stating that we need a 500-year plan. Because starting to discuss then implementations and ethics and moral and whatnot, it became clear that at every point in the discussion, someone might ask, is this actually sustainable?
Mm-hmm.
And then you see, it's not. So why don't you change the attitude, and why don't we change the idea of how we approach this to the point that we can say, yes, this will be sustainable. This will be something we can maintain over 500 years. We can educate the next generation to adhere to these standards. We can even bring them so far that they promise us to bring the next generation also into the boat with trying to promote that 500-year plan. And it doesn't matter if it's 500 or 600 years or 1,000 years. It's just the way we think about things I wanted to change. And yes, 500 years seem to be pretty catchy. And
it worked. I remember having the conversation with you, and, you know, it was a little intimidating for the group conversation that we were having. People were like, how is it possible? We're not going to be around in 500 years. So how will we know if whatever we're planning today is going to be implemented? But when you start to dig into what that really means, you can make decisions today that will have ripple effects. I mean, it's 5 generations of people, 6 maybe, right? And so, I mean, the kinds of conversations were around things like plastic. You know,
yes.
do we choose packaging that is still going to be here in the same form with the PCR logo on it in 500 years from now? Because there are standard pieces of packaging, plastic, that can live 800 years. Do we want PCR packaging that is still here in 500 years because we didn't make the decision to use biodegradable packaging? That's just one example of implementing a plan like that. Another one was communication. So how do we make communication strategy decisions today and culture decisions within the business today that have ripple effects in 500 years? Well, nobody that's living today is going to be here in 500 years from PCR, but the different communication techniques and education that is given to the people who are the foundational members of PCR and who work in the foundational version of PCR will have ripple effects through the generations, whether those people are working with PCR or not, which will have ripple effects into 500 years. You know, the way that we set up supply chains and the way that we set up triggering different ways of thinking leaves a legacy that lives on and has ripple effects for 500 years. Right?
Yes. So this was all about creating a more holistic bit of company than the standard American company is. So with PCR, yes, there was an initial drive to have PCR not only as a company, but also as some kind of a home base for the founders and for the members of PCR, for the employees, to the point that there is more to people working in a say, or rowing in the same boat. It's more about what these people are together, and if they are willing to carry on the ethics and the moral of a sustainable vessel which sails into the future. It's, for us, it was a yearning to have a home. I mean, Brittany and Madeline, both being my partners, they are pretty much far away from from where they originated. So they came to Hawaii as someone who has traveled and has also some kind of disconnection, and with that comes the yearning for something which you can call home. And and with PCR, having that centerpiece feeling of home or homeliness associated with, there also comes the question, can we provide and extend that to other people? Can we be friendly? Can we be someone or a company which embraces people and hugs them instead of
diminishing
them away?
Yeah.
Yes, diminishing, seeing them as competition and degrading everything. So the philosophy we tried to embrace was that of you can easily claim this, although you might call this sexist, but I see the company as a female implementation of a embodiment. I mean, I'm not a real fan of building companies and having constitutions which make a company being the same as a person. I see this one of the greatest failures in almost all constitutions on this planet, because a company is an aggregate which needs to be responsible to the core, and companies these days are built as instruments which shun responsibility and which do not want to be responsible for their actions. If they will be held responsible for their actions, then they usually go bankrupt, and then everything vanishes, and then they restart anew. I just today learned that school debt in the US cannot be foregone by going bankrupt.
It's the only debt in the US that will not be forgiven.
Jesus Christ. Now we have companies who do series of bankruptcies just to clear themselves from their obligations.
Oh, yeah. It's criminal. Like, the whole thing is set up for failure. And this is where we fuck people and their futures by burdening them with debt. And sure, I get it. It's their responsibility to make these decisions for the rest of their life. But you're asking people to make these decisions when they're 17 and 18 years old, where they feel that if I don't do this and don't go and study, I'm not going to have the same equal standing and opportunity as other people. So they saddle themselves with a couple of $100,000 debt at an age where a bank would never give somebody that age a mortgage.
Of
You're virtually
no.
asking them to take on the same kind of burden. And then we get upset with people that can't pay their student loans. It's a system that's set up for failure.
Yes, definitely. So with that, we also wanted to create a company which lives a spirit of openness and which does not compete with knowledge and with guarded secrets and stuff, and that general secret sauce attitude we have here in Hawaii in between producers and farmers and whatnot. So people are very guarded about their knowledge. They're very critical. They see everyone as competitor, and we formed PCR in the sense, and this is also part of the 500-year plan, that we are open source. So whatever we know, whatever we create, is of course copyrighted by the people creating it, but it's also open source in the sense that we can easily talk, we can easily access, we can easily share whatever knowledge we have in an open way. We don't have, it's a lot like the honorary payment you at around 1900, a doctor curing a patient was never paid according to some tariff. But the doctor at that time was paid because the patient was honor bound. And whatever the patient was earning, he had to deduce from whatever he was earning and whatever his honor-bound situation was, there was the payment to the doctor.
Well,
so
like a royalty
for
the rest of my life. Because you gave me the rest of my life, I have to give you a royalty of what I earn. Is that the kind of thing?
Yeah, maybe somehow you saved my life. I'm now obligated to you in a very deep sense, and I have the means. So why not do something good with those means?
Yeah, that's awesome.
But that was a different time. But the idea of being honorary bound for something we share as knowledge, we should reintroduce and we have as a type of business practice in PCR. Of course, there are tariffs. Of course, there are certain price points, but in the end, it has a lot to do with yes, whatever you can contribute, please contribute, but the knowledge itself should and will flow freely. And
to enable a 500-year plan, right?
Yes, to be sustainable, to be someone who works for the greater good of all people. Because if people recognize that PCR is doing something good with that, I don't believe that harm is coming from doing good. I really believe that doing good instills a lot of thought in people, because people are basically, in my opinion, good. And people love doing good a lot more than doing bad things to other people. Of course, we have the misogynist, of course we have the psychopaths, but I would say these are the oddities and not the norm. So normal behavior thrives on being recognized as someone who does good. And at some point, as we discussed previously, at some point you have to take a leap of faith, even with a company, and start to do the right thing, the sustainable thing, which is behaving in an open way, not in a competitive way, being honest. not selling shitty ground coffee to the cafes here. Yes, the basics of a decent life lived in with the best effort of doing good and leaving whatever we have touched in an unsoiled way. I mean, yes, what better example than shared toilets can we take? But in the end, it's all about being a human being which is actually capable and able to share whatever he experiences and owns and has created with other people, being recognized and getting high on the non-tangible stuff in your life. So becoming a person which excels because of the other people, because of what you can do to other people in terms of, yes, doing a good thing or making life worthwhile for other people, illustrating how the coffee chain works.
And trying to influence it in a way that's not destructive and not exploitative and not degrading
yes,
to people. Werner, I have to thank you for the wisdom that you've shared in this series, because I feel like finally the audience of this podcast gets to get to know one of the very wise friends in my life that, you know, I have spoken about before on this podcast, but I really, and I know I've said this to you before, I really value our conversations so much. A lot of the books in the stack behind me come from having a conversation with you, and you say, oh, you've got to go and read this book, or you think about reading this book. And, you know, it's, I value our conversations immensely. And I'm glad that the audience of this podcast finally gets some insight into the wisdom that I always get the benefit from through our conversation. So I want to thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
No problem. So where can people find PCR? And I guess we can just put the links in the show notes below. But folks, just in case you don't know who PCR is, please go and check it out. Go to the website. PCR has a really interesting future with regards to science and coffee and sensory experiences and agriculture and learning and all that kind of stuff. It's a very exciting future ahead. So please head to the show notes, check out PCR on social media and on the website. And there's a lot of great, interesting stuff coming from PCR in the future. So thank you again, Werner. Thank you, everybody. And stay tuned for the next series. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.